My name is Chetan Chaudhary, and I am from Twilio. I've started our IoT Business Unit. Today we are sort of like a startup within a startup. We are just getting started in the last sort of 18 to 24 months in the space. Traditionally, if you're not familiar with Twilio, we are a API, but primarily in the cloud communication space. So we provide messaging, voice, video, SIP trunking for applications. And we decided to move into the IoT space just because of by happenstance. In the past, we were seeing devices communicate via SMS and via voice calls, and we started to realize that there was actually a market here for Twilio. So in this presentation, I'll talk a little bit about the use cases, the role of sort of wide area networks within cellular IoT, the technology landscape, and the product overview, and then we'll go through some questions and roadmap. So really the question is that we hear a lot today is like, what is the role of wide area networks within IoT? And the actual role that you see up to play is the former role is M2M. So machine-to-machine communications. You see this starting in the late 90s, early 2000s, where the carriers started to sell small bits of data for you guys to communicate. These were really costly units, really heavy assets, typically like tractors and things that were very expensive that could actually have this type of technology in there. What we're starting to see as the last several years, as that technology has evolved, a whole different set of connection modalities. And that enabled a whole set of other use cases. These are the use cases that you guys are probably familiar with being in the hardware world, so everything from asset tracking, industrial monitoring, wearables, agricultural monitoring, and these are all that are using cellular or traditional sort of wide area networks to actually connect their device and be smarter. There was obviously a ton of real push by a lot of the analysts as well as several of the vendors to say there's going to be 20 billion devices or 50 billion devices. That's, a lot of it is just hype. Needless to say, there will be a lot of devices, and the costs for connecting via cellular or wide area network have dramatically come down. And so we're starting to see several different connection modalities. If you took just the M2M world and you took like some neutral stats, it's growing about 7 to 50% a year, depending on the vertical that you're looking at. And so there's still pretty healthy growth in the M2M world. But as we start to expand to these new use cases and we provide better and better tools for developers to enable the new use cases, we really think that this pie, this total addressable market, is actually pretty small. It's really going to explode because there are going to be use cases that we haven't thought of, and those use cases are really the ones that we're trying to enable at Twilio. So some of the sort of wide area functionality that you see today. Traditional LTE Cat4 modems. That's what you have in your phone typically. These are really expensive, cellular modems. They cost around $40. They give you all the bandwidth that you need, 150 megabits per second. But they're really expensive for a hardware maker to put into a device. And so the adoption of cellular networking or cellular connected devices really has been slowed down by LTE Cat4 devices, because if you think if your one piece in your BOM is $40+, imagine what your total BOM cost has to be, right? It's got to be well over $200, $300, $400 to justify that $40 single part. So that's kind of led some really interesting connectivity modalities. So things like Sigfox and LoRa. Sigfox, we think, is a really interesting company. They've raised a ton of money. I think it's like $350 million. They provide you really low bandwidth. The cost of the module is super cheap, $2 to $3 typically, and the battery life is about 20 years on Sigfox, which is fantastic for people that are building connected devices. Then there's LoRa, very similar as well, not as good in terms of battery life, but similar cost structure. But the real difference is that these are all radically different technical models for implementation and very different commercial models. You can't do a security camera with Sigfox or LoRa, as an example, obviously. And LTE is also the most pervasive in terms of connection modalities. So you go almost anywhere in the world and LTE is ready to go. So what are we seeing like in the future? What are we seeing maybe in the next sort of 12 to 18 months? and then even more so 18 to 24 months out. So LTE Cat 1 you can buy today. It's typically around $15 a module, though we're seeing some prices at 12. The max speed is 1 megabit per second. This is really interesting for people that are building hardware devices, because now you're getting a slightly higher device in terms of throughput. The battery life still isn't great, but it's still better than most, several days. So we're seeing a lot of companies such as, there's a new push right now around bike sharing. So you're seeing a lot of bike sharing companies actually use these LTE Cat 1 devices on their bikes. LTE Cat M1, also the modules are getting cheaper, probably around $8, 300 kilobits per second, battery life fantastic, 5 to 10 years. Most hardware devices don't last that long. So this is a really good thing for the market. And then NB-IoT. NB-IoT, again, module cost, 6 is the projected. Nobody knows when it's available. It's not, some people say that it's going to be available next year. T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T in the US have all committed to it. We just don't know what it's going to look like. But the battery life, again, 10 plus years. This NB-IoT is probably the most promising, and we think that's probably going to land someplace in the 18 to 24 month range. Now, you can buy LTE Cat M1 devices, but no actual carrier today will support it. So actually I take that back. Verizon did mention that they will be supporting it sometime by the end of the year, early next year. So why did I tell you all this information? Well, back to who Twilio is, and our DNA is a developer-first platform. We want to be able to provide or democratize the ability for any developer to get onto a cellular network, to provision and manage cellular connectivity. And so we've taken the same approach that we've taken in the past by providing really strong documentation, really good pricing where we show you at scale. We tell you how to get 1 megabyte with 1 SIM card. You can buy 1 single device, and then you can also scale to millions, and we provide that to you. And then we provide really strong, good documentation in the form of a blueprint and quick starts. These blueprints, and my old presentation, not in this one, actually show some of the actual content that we've built previously. If you go to twilio.com/wireless/blueprints, you'll see that content there. What it allows the developer to do is to think about how to prototype. So if you think about a developer starting out on a hardware project, the one thing that they want to do is they want to figure out, okay, I need to buy a piece of hardware. I need to figure out how to connect it. I need to understand how to build a prototype and extract data from that hardware piece. And then I need to figure out a small business model that can actually help me understand how to scale this. So we provided all 4 pieces there. And we provided a bunch of video content as well. And we did it with 3 areas. We did an asset tracking blueprint that allowed you to plug in to a device into your car for fleet tracking. We did an industrial monitor, which we called the bean counter. It's essentially a weight, temperature, humidity sensor, and we just called it a bean counter to pretend like it was a use case. And then the third was a remote monitor, which was a security device, and allowed you to build a security camera that was using cellular connectivity. Again, the whole idea for Twilio is to enable or democratize developers to get started. So this is our sort of team mission, which is to actually allow developers to easily connect devices to the internet anywhere in the world and programmatically control data and communications traffic exchanged by those devices. One of the things that we thought was really interesting, if you go to AT&T today, you go to Verizon, you go to any of the sort of cellular connected solution providers, they give you a data-only SIM. And they give you this data-only SIM, and they tell you, okay, go build your connected device. But maybe your device actually wants to use data, voice, and messaging. And we thought there was an interesting thing to enable. So our SIMs are actually regular SIMs. They actually use all 3 channels. And the reason why we did this is for one example, we figure that if you are building a device today, you may want to use the voice channel as a method of communicating. So here in New York and in San Francisco where I live, being able to deliver everything via in 1 hour through a bike messenger or Uber Eats is really popular. So now, what if you could take a simple device and allowed the communication device to use all 3 channels? You could actually create a closed loop system that allowed the developer to not only use the data channel, but also to maybe create a closed loop where only the delivery person could contact the person that's recipient or their home office, and they could be using just a normal cellular signal. So hence our SIMs actually have all three. Today, again, we're an API-first company, so we do have a console, but we allow you to order SIMs through the API. We allow you to do all the service lifecycle management pieces for the actual SIM itself. That means activation, deactivation, suspension. We allow you to query the usage, so you can write your own rate plans and create your own rate plans. You can say, if the device consumes 10 megabytes, then take this action. We allow you to do commands, which is essentially communicating with your device over SMS. This is oftentimes very popular to put devices to sleep, wake it up via SMS. We allow you to then also create these rate plans and define them so that you can use them for other types of devices or fleets of devices. This is the baseline functionality. We've got a bunch of other things that we're starting to innovate on now on top of that in terms of security, in terms of management and analytics. But we launched the product in October. We had about 4,000 developers sign up instantly, and we were able, over the last 6 months or so, 7 months or so, we've been able to onboard about 5 large enterprises that are deploying 10,000 plus SIMs a month, which is a fantastic growth in this space. And we're starting to see hardware companies. In fact, we have one that is looking at it now that's creating a wearable. That's the first wearable that we know of its kind that is going to be able to manage sort of your health and safety. And they're projecting very large numbers. Over 3 years, about 1 million devices. So we do have a console. You can use these SIMs today. You can log in if you're not a software engineer and you're not familiar with how to use an API. You can go in, you can order SIMs, you can configure SIMs. We show you how to get started. I've also brought about 150 SIMs, so if anybody wants one, they can have one. You can register, walk through this, and register the SIM. If you want to buy 50 SIMs or 100 SIMs, we allow, or 10,000 SIMs, we allow you to do that through the console self-service, which is another sort of core tenant at Twilio. We allow you to create your data, your messaging pools, so everything can pool together, all your devices. And what we've started to do now is allow for some interesting use cases in beta, and we're starting to see that growth. We've got a couple things coming down the road with VPNs, with X509 certificates. We're also providing an ability to manage this in an eSIM world, which is, if you guys are not familiar, the idea is to have a localized profile within a given country. So here, this product is US only, but if you wanted to actually go out and deploy to the UK, you wanted to deploy out to Australia, you eventually will be able to download a localized profile for that market with localized pricing and not be roaming, which is very expensive. So we'll be providing that towards the end of this year. So any questions?
Thank you. What's your sense of the vitality of the IoT ecosystem right now? Because it feels like, it went up. It's probably going down a little bit. Is it starting to go back up?
So everybody is familiar with that hype cycle that you're probably referring to. Yeah, there was a ton of hype. At the culmination of that hype was the acquisition of Jasper by Cisco. There was a trough of decline, which is where we're at today. And all of a sudden, we're starting to see hardware companies now think of putting cellular connectivity into their devices. And the reason for that is the cost of the modules. There's a direct correlation. When those modules have come down, the connectivity pricing has come down because there isn't enough volume to lower those prices. So that's what we're starting to see that uptick now.
Great. All right. Do we have questions?
Yeah. Oh, no, I was...
Yeah. Over there.
So you're saying the connectivity prices have gone down. What does it cost per megabyte for LTE?
So it's all dependent on volume. If you were to buy a single SIM today from Twilio, it costs $3 for the physical SIM. And we have a starter kit that comes with 3 SIMs for $10, but the physical SIM is typically $3. If you are buying a single megabyte of data and you're not scaling, it's 10 cents a megabyte. But that gets all the way down, if you are scaling, down to 1.2 cents per megabyte. is typically what we're seeing. So if you're a M2M use case or IoT use case that's not using consumer-like data, it's about $12 a gigabyte is the right sort of metric, is what you're seeing. And we suspect that within 18 months, we'll see probably about a 10% reduction in those prices.
So, I mean, you were talking about a security camera, for example, where that's like streaming, video, even if it's compressed in some whatever. I mean, do you find that to be like a viable? I mean, like, how do you expect that passed on to the consumer to? I mean, what would somebody like charge for that?
Yeah, so if you're doing a single security camera, we do have a plan that gives you $25 for a single gigabyte. But what we're seeing is that those security cameras, when you're deploying fleets of devices and you're committing to, okay, I'm going to have 10,000 security cameras and they all need to use a gigabyte, then you're seeing that committed price come down even further than the 1.2 cents per megabyte. But that's purely on the committed contracts. If you go to AT&T today and Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, you try to get a price quote from them, it's impossible. You'll get a price from them, you'll call back the next day with the same use case, different company name, different price point. We did a secret shopper, and that was exactly what happened to us at least 3 times from 3 different carriers. And so one of the things that we tried to do was publish our pricing so that you knew where it was going to be at scale. So the more that your bandwidth that you're pushing, the further your price drops on a pay-as-you-go basis. And then, of course, if you're committing to large volumes, all of that stuff can be dropped even further.
Do you think that the LTE over time starts winning over even Wi-Fi?
So 5G is the promise that will start winning over Wi-Fi because you're pushing potentially a gigabyte per second through that 5G connection. Who deploys 5G? I was at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona this year, and every carrier touts that they're going to have a 5G deployment. Nobody knows when. I think the real promise is going to be, the first that we're going to see is the NB-IoT. If you guys follow this industry, T-Mobile just bought 600 megahertz. They spent about $8 billion to buy spectrum last week. That 600 megahertz is great for penetrating through buildings. It also is great for NB-IoT. And so really, once we get to that $8 price point for NB-IoT, most data use cases, like the KeyMe use case, they don't need to have that throughput. They are putting all the kiosks. I guarantee you probably have cellular connected devices. We can solve that problem. But yeah, so all those devices.
Hardwired NYC discount.
Yeah, exactly, no problem. 10% off. But yeah, so the NB-IoT is really the promise because that lowers, the throughput is a lot better, and it's a lot cheaper for now a hardware person to get started very quickly. All right, thank you very much. If you want a sim, by the way, I've got sims to play with.